We carry on our study of the Gospel of Matthew in Matthew chapter 11, and we are going to read verses 1 to 3. I'm going to be reading from E.V. Rue's The Four Gospels in this Penguin Classic series. Chapter 11 and verses 1 to 3. When Jesus had finished instructing his 12 disciples, he left the place where he had been and went to teach and preach in their cities. Now, when John in prison heard of the wonderful things that Christ had been doing, he sent him a message by his own disciples. Are you, he asked him, he that was coming, or are we to expect another? Now, what is said in verse 1 of Matthew 11? In this chapter, we have a shift from a section of teaching to Jesus back in action. The arrest of John the Baptist is a significant moment in Jesus' ministry. It's one of those moments where we begin to see a shift in Jesus' ministry. We are now entering a darker period of ministry. The two ministries, while interrelated, are not in the strictest sense interconnected. Now, we simply lack the details historically to reconstruct what John the Baptist was doing and therefore connecting it with the ministry of Jesus. The one thing that we need to remember is that John the Baptist would be arrested. And he was arrested not just for being a preacher. I'm not saying he was challenging Herod Antipas's fiscal planning or his foreign policy. You turn to Matthew chapter 14 and you begin to see him realize that there was a side of John the Baptist's preaching that had political undertones. You challenge the ruler and you are challenging his legitimacy. Oh, we could argue it's just moral issues, but in that day and age, they didn't make that fine of a distinction. It is sometimes said that the church needs to keep out of politics. If you look at John the Baptist's ministry, you realize that that statement is a little hard to swallow because what we teach and preach in the church should have political implications. It should impact the society around us. And if we impact our society around us, how can we not impact the politics? It is interesting that even at this time, John the Baptist still was not clear as to who Jesus was and what he was about. The one problem we have here, and we've already touched on this, is how do we interconnect the two ministries, time-wise in particular? How much time has transpired since the baptism of John by John of Jesus? You know, well, we look at this and we can say it can't be that long because you would think if things transpired long enough, John the Baptist would be able to kind of get a sense of who Jesus was, and it wasn't probably just a short period of time. So I kind of take a middle position and say probably several months, maybe 6 months had passed since the baptism of Jesus by John. Enough time for John to hear of some of the things that Jesus was doing and beginning to get a sense that there was something going on here, but not enough time to really form an actual opinion of what had been happening or what was happening. I think the uncertainty that John expressed should make us read the story of Jesus more cautiously. When we read the opening chapters of the gospel, we do so knowing how things will turn out. John the Baptist did not have that ability. John the Baptist was living in the midst of these events. I also wonder if the way the material is condensed in the Gospels also misleads us. We look at some of this material and do not realize that maybe days or weeks, and in some cases even months might pass by. I think we can be guilty of assuming that for Jesus, an average day for him would be to achieve 7 miracles before lunch. There may have been days when he did no miracles, and even or week or two when nothing significant happened. Now, in the latter point, we know that Jesus traveled around Galilee. It takes time when you're walking. It takes time to announce your arrival. So there's probably some time passing by. When we read the Gospels, we view the religious leaders with disdain. If we were there, we would not have failed to see who Jesus was. That's the way we tend to look at things. If John the Baptist, who was above reproach, could fail to see who Jesus was, then maybe it's not all that surprising that the religious leaders did not see who he was. Remember that the religious leaders were not followers of Jesus. They only saw and experienced bits and pieces of Jesus' ministry. This in part may explain why some religious leaders eventually came to follow Jesus. And you can look, for example, at Acts chapter 15 and verse 5 for an example of this. You see, when the religious leaders gained a fuller knowledge of him and his teaching, some of them became disciples of Jesus. If Jesus and his word could not be easily comprehended in his day and age, then it is probably not all that surprising that in our day and age, that the church is not always going to be properly understood and comprehended.